Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to get a emulator running on the Raspberry Pi that will play SNK ROMs or Neo Geo ROMs. Now there's another main video that I've done to show arcade games, but that's focusing on MAME for all Pi. This is going to be specifically about GnGeo. The other video's got a bit of general background about arcade ROMs and how to get them up and running on a Raspberry Pi. But for this one we're going to focus on Neo Geo games made by SNK. And they sort of started about 1990 up to about mid 2000s, that sort of range. So there's quite a few ROMs that are available, and it does help to have a more recent ROM set to make sure you've got more of the current games. For example, with MAME for all Pi, that's geared at ROMs that came out up to about the year 2000. So after that, it obviously doesn't have the ROMs available. Now the ROM set, that again is important because we're talking about sort of arcade emulation or Neo Geo emulation. The ROM set that works with GnGeo on the Raspberry Pi is 0.138. So that's the one that you're really going to need to get the most compatibility out of this. I've used 0.138 and that's the one that's recommended for this, and I reckon it must be about 90% or so of the ROMs I think work on that, so that's the one you want to target. Okay, so don't forget to check out the previous main video that I've done for general background info, and remember that the ROM set versions do matter. So if you get a ROM of a particular game, it does really need to be the right version, otherwise it could be tricky to get that working. There are some systems, some bits of software like I think it's CLR Main Pro and ROM Center. They let you check which version of ROMs you've got, so there are ways to check if you've got the right sort of version. But this emulator, GnGeo, is only for SNK ROMs, so if it's not a Neo Geo SNK ROM, it's not going to run on this method. But it's a really popular way to sort of run a subset of those arcade games, because Neo Geo is not just in the arcade with the MVS machines, you could get home versions of the AES, so a lot of people might have had this sort of system in the home as well, so it's quite a good one just to sort of set up as a separate emulator. An emulation station is already set up to deal with this as well. If you've got the full sets of games for this on 0.138, the disk space that you'll need on the SD card will be about 3.5 gigs, so it's quite a lot if you want to run all of those games. But you don't have to put all of them on there, obviously, and it differs a little in that with MAME there's quite a lot of clones and that need parent ROMs, whereas with the SNK I don't think that's the case at all, or if it's pretty rare that you need another ROM to sort of run the main set. Typically they're standalone on the whole, so you can just pick and choose the games you want. Now this demonstration I'm doing will be based on RetroPie 2.6.0, so if you want to emulate exactly what I'm doing, it's probably best to use that image. That said, you could always install this separately and just configure it as a standalone emulator if you wanted, but it's quite often easier to try and generate this based on an image that you can download. So areas that we cover, I mean, you can see running in the background, it's got Metal Slug going, it's running perfectly well. There are some ROMs that will go a bit slower when there's a hell of a lot going on the screen, but typically I find GnGeo runs it all pretty well. It's quite a lean, efficient emulator. Other emulators that run the SNK ROMs are FBA, the Final Burn Alpha, that might run some, and you've got Advanced MAME, that might run some, but I tend to use this for the SNK ROMs. It does seem pretty good on the whole. So the areas we'll look at are how Emulation Station will link up with this. Then we'll look at the general config files on the Raspberry Pi for GnGeo, how to get your controller working, and how to make sure you've got the right BIOS file, that sort of thing. That's quite important with the Neo Geo. And after that it should be pretty easy, and all you need to do really is get the ROMs, get the BIOS file, copy them to your Pi, and should be away. So okay, the next thing we'll look at is the config files in the Raspberry Pi, and then at the end we'll also run a couple of separate games and look at the configuration within it, because unlike MAME for all Pi, when you hit tab to get a menu, GnGeo does have an on-screen menu. In fact, I can probably bring it up now. There you go. That's triggered by essentially a hotkey, and you have got these inbuilt options as well. So we'll run through the options that you can get through that at the end as well. Okay, here we are in the Raspberry Pi. You can access this directly through your TV or remotely through PuTTY like I am here. And the first thing we're going to do to see how GnGeo is working, or it's GnGeo for Pi, so it's a slight port or variant of GnGeo, but it is very similar. So what we're going to do is change directory to etc emulation station, and in this directory we're going to edit that or look at that systems file. So if I type nano space es underscore systems.cfg, that brings that up, and I'm going to search for the bit I want with Control W, and down the bottom I'm going to type GnGeo like that, hit enter, and I can see here we've got the entry to deal with GnGeo. So to run that, for the ROMs, for those ROMs to use GnGeo, they must be in this directory here, which is neogeo-GnGeo-pi. And just as a reminder, you do need, or on this one I'm using 2.6.0. If you use a different version of RetroPie, you might not have that folder there. It doesn't mean you can't use GnGeo, but you might just have to be aware of a different path. Okay, so that's the path, and the ROMs that it will read or see is anything ending in .zip or .fba, and typically they will all end in .zip, so that's fine. Then the command line here, we've got the first section deals with running a particular video mode. You can, when you start a ROM, you can always change that by tapping X, and then you get a menu screen to change the video output if you want to change that. The first thing it does is in the emulators folder here, it will run GnGeo, and then it passes it a parameter -i of where the ROMs are. So that's home pi, RetroPie, ROMs, neogeo-GnGeo pi. So that's where it knows to look for the ROMs. And then after this, it does pass it a parameter -b, which is the location of the BIOS file. The BIOS file for the Neo Geo is called neogeo.zip. That's what the file that contains the BIOS, and there'll be multiple sort of BIOS related files. And usually with GnGeo, that's the path that you use to pass it, -b, and then a path to where the Neo Geo BIOS should be put. But I have tried this, and I've tried changing it, and I've tried making it look in different directories, or keeping it the same and putting it in this directory. But I would say consistently it never pays attention to this, and it might be either I'm doing something wrong, or maybe this variant of GnGeo for Pi doesn't look for the BIOS in the folder it's told to look. But whatever the reason, the upshot is it will work if you put the BIOS file in the ROMs folder. So you get your neogeo.zip, just put it with the rest of the ROMs, it will work. I cannot get it to specify the path where it's looking for the BIOS. But like I say, I might be doing something wrong, or something's just a little bit different in this version, but I wouldn't spend too much time trying to specify where you want to store the BIOS, because it just doesn't seem to listen. I've even tried specifying it in the GnGeo config file, which we'll see in a minute, but it doesn't seem to pay attention to that either. So basically, put it in the ROMs folder. Okay, and that's what it's going to run there, and this is just standard emulation station information. So you can see that if you want to get that running, you put your ROMs in this folder, and it will kick it off. And that's really all you need to know about the emulation station folder. You can, file. You can quit out of that with Control X. Now, after this, we'll look at where the GnGeo program itself is, just so you're aware of where it is on the disk. So if we change directory to apt and change directory to RetroPie. Now in this directory there's a configs directory which typically holds most of the configs for the emulators, particularly controller configs, but it doesn't with GnGeo, so you can ignore it. Now if we change into emulators here and list that, you can see we've got GnGeo here. So I'm going to have a look in that directory, and in that directory we've got three directories. We've got Neogeo Bios, which is where Emulation Station told GnGeo to look for its BIOS, but it doesn't listen, it's not in there, and even if you put it in there, it doesn't seem to look for it in there, so ignore it. Then you've got the binary folder, so if we look in there, you can see that's where GnGeo is, and you can pass it a parameter here. If I do GnGeo, and you can even run it from the command line, I'm not going to, but if I put the help flag GnGeo-H, it would do nothing. Let me try again. If I go sudo geo-H, okay, so try this way, and there we go. It's got some flags that you can put on it, but I'm not convinced that they will all work with this variant of GnGeo, because I've tried putting a few in, particularly like the BIOS path that we were looking at earlier with -b, and it doesn't necessarily pay attention to that. So by all means, feel free to try and put some of these in the config file that we'll look at in a minute, but I wouldn't say they were 100% work. I mean, a lot of them you don't really need anyway, and you specify them differently in the config file that we'll see. So you're not really missing out on much. There's not an awful lot of options there, really. Okay, so that's just so you know where it is really, and what it is. Now, if I go back a directory, here you can see the other directory was called share. I'm going to change directory into there and list that. We've got a couple of folders, and in the GnGeo folder here, it is a very important file. There we go. It's GnGeo_data.zip, so it's a compressed file. Now, in that compressed file is a list of the ROMs that GnGeo will happily play, and they end in .drv, and therefore GnGeo to process, to work out, I guess to make sure that you're running the right version of the ROM, so it's like a ROM set checker almost. And you can open that in Windows. In fact, I should be able to show you what that looks like. Here we go. So here, this is inside the GnGeo_data.zip file, and you can see there's a load of effectively ROM names or game names ending in .drv, and that's one way to check, you know, will this emulator run that particular game. If it's listed here, chances are it will, and within this file is the information to tell GnGeo of the ROM files within that ROM set it's looking for. If you're not too sure what I'm talking about, it's fine, it doesn't matter, you don't need to know to get it to work, but it's useful to know that those files are in there. Okay, so just loaded the RV BIOS really. It's about 239 items, so that's about the game count that it'll deal with. And yeah, you can have a look at that if you need to. Excuse me. Okay, right, that was the GnGeo_data, and you'll notice when you play a game through Emulation Station, you might notice that file flash up on the screen, and that's just GnGeo scanning it to see what it needs to do to run that particular game. Okay. Okay, so next, let's have a look at the config file. Now, to get back to the home directory, you can type cd and the tilde sign. So you can see now we're in home pi. And although it looks like there's a couple of directories and a file there, if we type ls-lah to show hidden files as well, you've got this one here, GnGeo. And that's where the config file is. So if I change directory to GnGeo and list that directory, I've got various files. Now, all of these .nvs are just because I've been playing games and it's written, I think it stands for non-volatile RAM, so some basic information about the game. I should be able to delete those actually. Okay, that's better. Okay, so now I've just got two files in there, and you'll only have this one file, GnGeo_rc, which is the config file, and that's the one we're going to edit. So this is kind of like your retroarch.cfg type file. It's where you can pass some parameters. So now if I log into that one, okay, so we're going to use a text editor called Nano here, and I'm typing sudo nano GnGeo_rc, bring that up on the screen. Now this might look slightly different to the one you'll have. You'll probably have P1 control and P2 control, and that's it. And that's fine, that's pretty much all you do need, but I've added a couple of extra lines which I'll go over in a minute. Now I've only got one controller at the minute, so I've added a hash for the line that I want it to ignore. I think this is the default one that just sets some keyboard keys, and I've added the Player 1 controller I want to use. Now I've got an iBuffalo USB stick, and this is the control set that will work fine for an iBuffalo. The way that the controls are set, and I'll put the detail in the forum post so you can see what's going on, but essentially GnGeo lets you map for the Neo Geo an A button, B button, C, D, start button and coin as opposed to select, so it's got coin, then it's got up, down, left, right and a menu button, and that menu button was the one you saw on the screen earlier to bring you up a bit more detail, kind of like tab on MAME4 basically. Okay, and the codes here are J0, which means joystick 0, as opposed to K, which is a keyboard. So I'm using a joystick, so put J. It's the first one plugged in, so it's 0, and then it's button code 3, and you can get your button codes using the JS test command. I'll show you really, if I just quit out of that with Control X and then type JS test dev input JS0, then you can see down the bottom here I've got a USB plugged in here with the name 2axi 8-button gamepad, and if I move about on that and press some buttons, you'll see there that these are getting flagged when I press it, so I know that when I press the Y button on it, it's number 3, and I know when I press X it's number 2, and so on. You've got left and right, up, down, and this is the same type of config that would be in RetroArch CFG, so you can look in that file if you want to see what your controller buttons are, but this is how you can get the code, the numbers. What else have I got? I've got select, which is number 6 there, and you get the idea. Okay, so if I quit out of that, Control C, and go back to sudo nano, that file there. So I've put in, I want the A button, on mine anyway, I've gone, the A button is, for the Neo Geo, is actually the Y button on my controller, and the B button is the B, and the C button is the A, but you know what I mean. So I've just mapped those to various buttons. Start, the coin I've put to my select button, and then one thing to notice though, you've got on the up and down axis, which is a 1, the up and down axis is 1, and the left and right is a 0 axis on mine. But if you put capital A, it works in a certain left to right manner, and A lowercase inverts that, and I've just found that on my joypad, and I think quite a lot of joypads, you need to set this, the up down inverted, so it's a lowercase a. But you know, if that doesn't work for you, just put an uppercase A and you should be away. So it's one or the other. Then I've got to spare the left and right shoulder buttons on my controller, and I've put one of them, the button 5, which is the right shoulder button, to activate the menu. So you know, I've got that spare one. It's a bit different from RetroArch in that there's not sort of an enable hotkey option. It's just a single button to bring up the menu. So yeah, you do need a spare one. So I've put that one in there. Then separately, you might see some instructions where you've got a GnGeo config file and it's got various sort of parameters you can put in, and I'm not sure again that they all work, like for example specifying where the BIOS file lives, because I've tried putting that in here and it didn't seem to listen. So the ones that I know it does pay attention to are country and system, and to put the country value you just put a space and the country value. The 3 valid values are USA, Japan and Europe, so you can put one of those 3. And for system, the valid options are arcade, so like an MVS system, or UniBIOS, so you can get UniBIOS working. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically a non-official BIOS that lets you edit a lot of settings in a Neo Geo, so you can set the difficulty really easily, jump to particular bits of music, add cheats very easily. It's got a lot of flexibility, and in fact I might set that now, so when I play the game you'll see what a UniBIOS looks like. But if you just want to sort of play standard, you just set that to arcade, put the country here and you'll be away. Also, I think by using UniBIOS, it might not pay attention to the country. The country is more a parameter when you use the system arcade, because within UniBIOS you can set the different countries quite easily as well. So again, I'll show you that in a minute. That's it really. P1 control. If you've got 2 players, put P2 another line for P2 control and put in your keys there. And that's it. I'm going to control X out of that. It says, do I want to save at the bottom? Press yes. Press enter. And that's that. Okay. Now, I did mention earlier about the Neo Geo Bios. And I'm going to open that now because there's quite a bit of detail in there that you need to know. So I've got one here, which I happen to have called what's that? Okay, so I happen to have called it custom Neo Geo, but it must be called, when you put it in the directory of your ROMs, neogeo.zip. In fact, I don't think I did that. Let's have a quick look here. You can get to your Rom directory by going to your home directory, cd ~, cd RetroPie, cd ROMs, and in here, the one that they all go in is this one here, neogeo-GnGeo Pi. So if I change into that directory, there you can see the full path here. That's where all of the ROMs should be placed, including the BIOS file, which is neogeo.zip. Now, in this version of GnGeo, it only needs these files in the neogeo.zip file. Again, ignore the fact I've called it custom. It's neogeo.zip. That's what it should be called. If it's not called that, I don't think it'll work properly. Now, the ROMs are from 0.138. The ROM set's from 0.138, and in there you'll have a neogeo.zip. And if you open your version from 0.138, there'll be quite a lot of files here, probably at least twice as many, but you don't need them for this purpose, so you can delete out from the zip the files you don't need, or you can keep them there. It probably doesn't matter too much if they're there, they just won't be used. But these ones are needed, and I'll put some information in the forums about those files. But briefly, you've got this top one, 000-lo.lo. That's kind of like a required key file for the BIOS, and that must exist. And you might have a similar file called ng-lo, and it's just a renamed version. But they must be, in this, you would have to rename it to be this. So you must have these files named in this manner for it to work properly. Okay, so another one is sfix.sfx. Sometimes in some ROM sets it's called sfix.sfix, but if you need to rename this sfix.sfx for it to work properly. You can avoid sort of updating all of these files or changing the ones that are in the Neo Geo zip. You know, it'll probably work with most of the ROMs, so it's not essential to sort of tweak these to be precisely this, but you probably will get improved compatibility. And then, as we saw earlier, back on this file here, in this file here, you can set which country you want to have, USA, or you can type Europe there, or you can type Japan. Now, these are the files that it would use. So for example, if you type USA there, this is the country file for it, and if you didn't have this, you wouldn't be able to use the USA one. You've got this one is a Japanese file, and you've got this one for the Asian file, and this one excuse me, is the European file. So you have to have those in place if you want to specify a particular country. Then you've got the system files, which is the AES BIOS. So the AES is the home system. And then optionally, you've got a Unibios file. Now you might have in your ROM set things called Unibios 1.2, Unibios 2.3, and that's the versions of Unibios, because there's about, I don't know, about 10 different versions out there, little increments. But you just pick the version you want to use and call it or rename it uni-bios.rom for the system to be able to use it. So it must be called that. And then you can use a Unibios, which we saw up here. Okay, that's pretty much it for the Neo Geo zip. Like I say, you can use the one you've got and it'll probably be fine, but this GnGeo variant for the Pi does look for these files in that ROM set. So it does help to get them. And for whatever reason, it's reporting it as 100 or as near as damn it 128k each. So they're all of that sort of order of size. Okay, right, so we've looked at the config file and where you get the zip files from, that sort of thing. And now I think we can fire up a game and you'll see how to use that interface to configure different options within GnGeo. But that's all you need to set everything up. Like I say, this neogeo.zip file must go in the ROM folder. Okay, so I've just gone into Emulation Station and opened up a ROM, and it's just fired up. Now, the first thing I want to do is show what happens when you boot up, because I've just missed that start, but I can get to that screen because I'm using Unibios. It's got a built-in reboot, so I'm going to hold down Start, and that's how you get to it when you're in a game, like it's playing now. You hold down Start and press ABC at the same time, and that's ABC of the Neo Geo mapping, not ABC on your control. It might be ABC on your controller, but it's whatever the Neo Geo mapping for it is. So I get that on the screen, and the bottom option here, soft reboot, it's the Neo Geo A button to select it, and then you get a brief moment on the Unibios boot up screen to get into the main menu. So I can press A now, reboots to Unibios, I press ABC at the same time, and I've got into this option. And the only option that I'm really interested in here is a region setup. So I go in there with A, and I can say, am I Japan, USA or Euro? Well, I'm going to say I'll be in Japan region. And whilst you've got to emulate the option for arcade, which is the MVS, or console AAS, if you choose arcade here, for whatever reason, it seems to forget the controls. So I do have trouble with a controller trying to choose an arcade mode here. So I just tend to go for the console because it works fine. So I'm going to press B and then C to exit out of this, and it just restarts the game set to Japan and console mode. If you want arcade mode, I'd go back to that config file we saw earlier and put arcade instead of Unibios there. That's sort of easier. Okay, so you can see use it in Japan only. That's because we set it to the Japanese mode. And you'd be away with it. Let's just give it a quick bit of gameplay. Yeah, it's definitely in Japanese mode. Okay, so I pause that with the menu button, which I've mapped to the right shoulder. So I've tapped that and I get these four options. I've got load and save and exit. To exit will take you back to Emulation Station. It doesn't restart the game, it goes right back to Emulation Station. To choose that, it's button A, or Neo Geo button C, that would be to select it. But I'm going to look at options first. And here we go. So we've got full screen option, VSync, auto frame skip, which is on, show FPS, and I've done this, but it just seems to consistently show 60 frames per second. I'm not sure if that's right or it's just stuck on a value, but yeah, you can try these and see how it looks. Then you've got under effect, I think it goes into scan lines, yeah, so you can try different scan line effects. There we go. Let's go back to no effect. Quit out of that. Yeah, so it's Neo Geo button A to go back and C to select. And you can even save it on a per game basis. So, but feel free to play through those options and see what works best for you. Load game is quite useful in this. Although you can load all the ROMs through Emulation Station, if I go in here, you'll see it names the games slightly more, I don't know if it's more accurately here, but it knows because it's against the 0.138 ROM set, it can tell you precisely, oh, this one's set 1, that's set 2, and then it's got all the variants of particular games detailed quite nicely. So if you're going to play your SNK games, I'd be tempted to use this interface so you can see what's going on. Like I say, there are a few games that still seem to have problems, but on the whole, it works fine. Let's try this one, Kizuna Encounter. So let's load that. And you get a little loading guide there. And it's confirmed Japan console mode, and it'll remember that from, even if you turn everything off, it seems to remember that quite happily. Press start. There's no select this because it's emulating an AES. Or I could go back into the config file, change it to arcade, and it wouldn't. Okay. Obviously, if you want to read a lot more in-game information, don't set it to Japanese, put USA or Europe. Okay, let's try another game there. I know Metal Slug's quite popular, so if we try and load one of these up. Okay, still in Japan console. For use in Japan only, and just to show, if I go back to that menu with holding that start, press ABC, reboot, and then just ABC on that screen. Go into Japan console, I'll put it to USA console. And we shouldn't see that Japanese warning at the start now. There you go, yeah, so it's just straight into the game there. Press start and give this a go.
Mission 1, start! Do machine gun. Thank you.
You can see it's fairly, it's really playable. I don't know if maybe when there's quite a lot of sprites on the screen, it slows down a bit. It's probably not quite as accurate as some of the other emulators, but it is on the whole pretty efficient and speedy. I haven't found emulators that have run something quicker, but maybe some people get better experience from FBA or even advanced maybe. Oops. without any problem. Certainly the ones I've tried anyway. If there's any particular ones that you'd like me to try, just drop me a note and either put it on the video comments or in the forum, and I'll put a video about that. If you found the video useful, please do link to it and let other people know, just to help them out. But hopefully this has helped you get SNK ROMs running on a Raspberry Pi.